What is the flippin' story, everybody? This is episode 11 of season 2 of Flip the Script. And I have been beyond excited about the guest that I have on today since we actually put this together. I've been thinking about it all week, and I just think that it's going to be a tremendous conversation for so many different reasons. I've had two guys on the podcast so far, right? So my father first, and then Paddy, who, as we've discussed, rudely knocked me out in a Irish title fight in 2013. And it was fantastic having those conversations. And I each had conversations with them about how they felt about what was going on of late in the country with, obviously, Aisling Murphy's death. And as well, I found out about an attack in Fermoy, actually, that happened yesterday. And a lot of the kind of narratives that were floating around at that time, I thought to myself very simply, I would love to get, firstly, a woman on the podcast. And then secondly, you know, if somebody could have, you know, some sort of a psychological background. And I didn't know what I was actually looking for. I really didn't. And I was looking for a forensic psychologist. And Ríoghnach told me that that's what I was looking for. But to be honest with you, it evolved so much from there that it was like, that was just this two-dimensional view that I had on it, that's what I wanted to get on. But I really just wanted to get somebody on that was going to, that was going to have a good conversation with me, and that was going to maybe help me make sense of it all and help me make sense of certain things and just have a good conversation. And if people get something from it, that's fantastic. I'm going to give a little introduction to Ríoghnach here, right? First of all, you're absolutely tough as coffin nails, right? And that's not because she's a woman or whatever. It's like just that you are tough as coffin nails. From listening to Lydia's podcast, I really just had an awful lot of respect and admiration for everything that you were talking about. I won't get into that too much, but listen to that podcast, First Exchange podcast with Lydia and Ríoghnach. It's brilliant. But I just, after I listened to that conversation, was like, it was very strange. I was running in a forest in the dark on my own, and I felt kind of uneasy at times, like, because you were talking about, you know, sexual offenders, violent people and all this kind of stuff. And I was like, holy shit. You know, I felt kind of that heightened sense of awareness, you know, like that prey animal type of thing where I'm like, I'm looking around the place, you know, is that bush moving? That kind of thing. And I really got an awful lot from it. And by the time I got back to the car park, I realised you were the person that I needed to get on. So, I really am going to let you take the lead on, you know, explaining who you are and what you do. But I always kind of, I first of all, welcome to the show. Yeah. And second of all, right, I always kind of start these conversations with, take me way back. Take me way back when, let's talk about like little Ríoghnach, right? Let's talk about, because I talked to my dad about his childhood and I talked to Paddy about his childhood, and I feel like childhood is a great place to start with who we are as people, how we came to be. Because like, I know you know as this forensic psychologist, jiu-jitsu player, you know, everything that, you know, that you do. But like, I really just want to find out, where did that come from, you know? So you grew up in Cork, you know, we just discussed that as well, that you're also Corkonian, which is class.
Yeah.
But what was childhood like? What was it like for you growing up?
So I would say that I had a very happy childhood. I'm laughing to myself because I'm sure we'll get onto it in a while, but I'll explain in a while. When I do assessments with people, this is exactly how I start the assessment.
Really?
As well.
That's so funny. It's like, tell me about your childhood.
Exactly. Yeah. So tables are turned. So there's 7 people in my family. I grew up with my parents and my 3 sisters and my twin brother in Macroom, which is a town about halfway between Cork and Killarney. I would say a very happy childhood, stable background. My dad is a vet. My mother is a retired primary school teacher. The influences in the family home would have been on, I think like education, academia. And then I would describe, I think, my parents as well as very kind of sort of like playful and a bit daft as well, kind of tongue in cheek, I think, as well. So a bit mad. I think in a good way. I think
way.
In the best way, yeah. I would say both of them maybe are perhaps a little bit eccentric in their own ways. So I would say all of that very much influenced the development of my kind of personality, I guess. And I think as a child, similar to them, I would say I was always very curious, interested in learning about everything. I would have been quite studious. I suppose school suited my abilities, where I enjoyed going to school and sitting down for 8 hours and studying and all of that. That suited me and my personality. But then I think equally so, I was I wouldn't say really wild, but like a small bit kind of wild, probably in my own right. And I would have been, I would have kind of been in trouble a bit in school and stuff, just from, I think, sometimes I was probably like hyperactive, and I always had a thing. I'm painting myself a very good light here. I always had a thing about like I would try to, I would debate teachers and different things, and if I felt like they were being unfair or unjust to someone, I'd like come in and try to argue the case for that person and stuff. But I would have been like an outgoing child, and lucky enough to be quite confident, I guess, and like secure in myself. It's something interesting though. I hated sports or exercise.
Really?
Anything like that.
That's mad.
Yeah.
It's such a big part of your life now.
Yeah, it is. Yeah. And I didn't really exercise before I was 27.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's mad. To think that you're at such a high level in the sport that you're doing now and not having a history of it.
Yeah. No, I wouldn't say I really like high level, but I do enjoy it a lot. And like I train jiu-jitsu 4 times a week, and my recent thing that I've forgotten about is I started playing tennis as well, like 3 times a week, which I love. But so it's interesting why I wasn't so kind of into sports, because like my parents would have encouraged that if myself or any of my siblings were into it. But I don't know, I think it was just the academic influence, and like we are a very close family, and growing up we always have dinner together, and always would have been a debate about current affairs and different controversial topics, and it still is actually to this day. Yeah. So like if I was going to bring like a friend or someone around to my family, at a family event, they'd want to be well able and okay with people like shouting over each other, but not in like in an arguing way, just in like a debating a topic kind of a way, know? So I guess I thought I found it, I've been very stimulated. I found like my family environment, and I still do as well, like very, very stimulating, very thought-provoking. And then what else about me? I always had a very kind of I guess like active imagination as well. And I like to think that I've brought the kind of childlike element of me along into adulthood very much as well,
That's very interesting.
Yeah, and I think it's kind of essential to kind of optimum mental health as well, to kind of continue to, I don't know, view the world somewhat as a child with beginner's eyes and all of that. So I would describe myself still as very kind of, I think kind of playful, I would say, and childlike, not childish.
Yes, yeah. No, I've been drawing so many parallels from what you're saying,
Oh, really?
Yeah, so many. Well, like my father was in the army, 40 years, an army officer, and my mother was in hospitality for the majority of her time, right? But me and my father grew very, very close together on an intellectual basis, and he was very studious, and he was the teacher. The kind of the more teacher side of things. And so because you were saying there, you used to get in trouble a lot. There wasn't a day go by that I wasn't in some sort of trouble in school for something. Because I was wild, same as yourself. And I was kind of bored as well, really bored about what was going on. And I just felt like it was just, the idea of sitting still for 8 hours a day was incredibly mind-numbing for me. And it's very even more specific to that you were saying that you were the defender of people. I had a huge chip on my shoulder for that.
Really?
For injustices.
Yes.
From like 6 or 7 years old. Like I would literally be talking to my teacher and be like, you think you can talk to my dad because I'm the child? You know what I mean?
Nice.
like I'm 8 and this teacher's like, who the fuck is this kid telling me, you know what I mean, that I'm only talking to him like this because I feel like I'm the adult, you know?
Yeah.
But I think I held that throughout my life as well. And it was a very much kind of a thing of this trying to be a defender of the weak, you know, or whatever, or like the people that can't defend themselves. And I think, you know, that informs how we live, you know, a lot of the times. And maybe, do you think that kind of fed into what you decided to actually go down that route and follow on?
Definitely. I definitely do. And like, maybe this sounds ridiculous to say, but like I used to kind of because I get in, like, think now, like I used to kind of get in trouble and I used to like break things a lot as well, and I was just kind of clumsy and impulsive. I don't know, maybe these days somebody would say I've ADHD or a little bit of it or something, but anyway, I found that like I'd be, you know, my parents would be giving out to me for messing up or whatever, and I kind of always felt like, you know, that I suppose I didn't feel like, if I could just like explain myself properly and if I was, you know, heard, then I wouldn't get in trouble or something. I'm not like blaming my parents, they were just doing normal parental stuff, you know, but I think like definitely coming from that, the idea that like just trying to kind of, you know, defend people who, are very easily kind of maligned or judged negatively, I suppose, and just try to kind of have more, I guess, justice in the world, I suppose, and to see that often if somebody is evidencing problematic behaviour, it's not just their own fault, I suppose. Often it's to do with like the environment in which they're in, you know, and how, I guess, the environment can play into somebody manifesting problematic behaviour as well.
Yeah, that's going back to the conversation that I had with Paddy last week. Was I am and he is seeking less judgment and more understanding in my life.
Nice.
And so when something like what I mentioned earlier with the Aisling Murphy murder happened, I sought more understanding of what was going on and more understanding of myself and how I was feeling about it, and less judgment of, you know, the narrative that was being put out there and the narrative that was being pointed at men in general. Let me as a man remove the judgment I have of it, and let's just try and understand it. You know what I'm saying? And I think that's a huge point to make, is that we do straight away go default to judgment a lot of the time. And I think that people, we're going to get into this in the podcast here at what you actually do. And when you're talking and the way you talk about it, when I was listening to you on Lydia's podcast, I was trying to really just understand and not to judge. And so, and I found it difficult, actually. I found it difficult not to judge and not to think, how can this person treat a pedophile or something like that as a human being? Because I don't see them like that. And that was a judgment on my call. And so I was like, right, okay, let's try and understand that, you know. And, you know, what I came to was, you know, I came to my own kind of reasoning. And my own reasoning was, I don't think anybody would choose to be one.
Is it? Yeah.
You know, I don't think anybody just goes out and goes, you know, at 10 years of age goes, I wouldn't mind being a paedophile when I'm an adult.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
It's
not something that someone's just going to choose to do. So I really...
What do you want to be when you grow up? Oh, a paedophile.
Yeah.
It's not... It doesn't happen, I don't think.
No, it's not the number one job choice of anybody. So. You know what I mean? It's not a great
up there
career.
On the CAO.
Yeah.
Jesus,
it's got up to 500 points. You know, like, I just don't think that's what goes through someone's head. So if you can try to actually understand where somebody has, how someone has gotten to that point. That's what I was getting, because I put up a questions box on Instagram yesterday. A lot of the questions were surrounding that, was like, how do people find themselves in that situation? And when they find themselves in a situation that they are a sex offender or they are a paedophile, how do they feel about themselves? And how do they feel like it's normal? Do they feel like it's like any addiction that you can't see outside of it, that it's just your life? So what I suppose want to get into is, right, for everybody that's listening now, before we get into this, like, what do you do now as a job? Because I know that you qualified in applied psychology and you had done a master's and you had done further education. I really liked your Instagram bio, aspiring polymath.
Yes.
That was just for anybody listening. Polymath is basically somebody who wants to learn and know things and wants to, increase their knowledge. And I just think that's so admirable, that you want to do that. So for everybody that's listening, what does a forensic psychologist do, and what do you do specifically?
Okay, so people probably know what a psychologist is. A psychologist is someone who studies human behaviour, and in particular looks at people's mental health as well and how that contributes to their behaviour. And then the word forensic means in relation to the law. So forensic psychologist is someone who takes all their knowledge about psychology and what informs human behaviour and then applies that to people who are going through the criminal justice system. So in my job, it's kind of twofold. I do assessments and I do therapy. So I do assessments generally for the defence. So if somebody has committed a crime, they go to their solicitor and the solicitor would refer them to me for an assessment. And the point of the assessment is to try to, just as you've been talking about, to try to identify that person's unique pathway to that offence. So all the events in their life that have led them to that point in time where they've committed this offence. So I'm trying to understand that and outline that in my report that's given to the judge. Then also the purpose of the assessment is to do a risk of reoffending piece. So particularly with violent and sexual offences, there's a list of known risk factors for these type of offences. So I'll collect information and I'm trying to kind of score the person on those risk factors to kind of give the judge an idea of what this person's risk of reoffending is. And then I'll make recommendations to reduce that risk. So usually the recommendations involve therapy to look at what generally comes up, which is sort of unresolved trauma, limited coping skills, variety of different things. And then the other part of my work is the therapy. So then I'll do psychotherapy with the clients to try to work on the issues that I've identified to try to reduce their risk then. But in the assessment part, I take all that information, as I'm saying. So I do what's called clinical interviews, which is basically what we're doing. I sit down with the person. We don't have headphones and microphones. I sit down with the person for, I'll meet them numerous occasions, probably in total about 6 or 8 hours. And I'll go through their life story. So literally, as you asked me, I'll go back to, okay, tell me about, let's look at your very early years of life. Who were you living with? What were the influences in the family home? I'm paying particular attention to whether there was any issues in the family home, such as like addiction, mental illness, physical abuse, sexual abuse, issues with mental illness, any kind of serious physical illness as well in the family growing up. So any kind of stressor on the family unit, basically. So I'm trying to get an idea of like what was influencing that small child and that infant, I guess, in their early years of development. And then I talk through all their life, their childhood, their adolescence, and then whatever 20s, 30s, whatever age they are. And then I do, if they can read and write, okay, I give them personality tests as well. So a battery is the collective noun for personality tests. So I give them a number of personality tests. It's another way to collect information because some people are more likely to tell you something in a conversation, and other people are more likely to tell you something if it's kind of written down and you're not sitting in front of them asking them straight out. So it's just another way to gather information. And then I ask for if they've been in contact with any professionals like mental health professionals. I need their consent to contact those people, and I'll also contact a few people in their life who know them well as well. So like if it's a spouse, a sister, brother, parent, whoever is kind of appropriate. So I'm using all these different sources of information, and I'm putting all that together. As I said, to try to inform what the contributing factors are to their offence, their risk of reoffending, and then recommendations. And that report is generally used, and this is where, I don't know, people might think it's controversial or disagree. That report then is generally used by the solicitor to get the accused perhaps a more lenient sentence. What would be seen as a more lenient sentence by most people, I suppose, or it could be the difference between what's called a suspended sentence and a custodial sentence. So a suspended sentence you might see in the news, so-and-so was, convicted of assault, and they received, a 3-year sentence with 2 years suspended. So that means that they serve a year in custody in prison, and the 2 years they're back in the community. And if they come to the attention of the guards again, then their custodial sentence gets reactivated, and they have to go back into prison for the
remainder.
For the remainder, yeah. But I think the interesting thing to say is that, for me, and I've seen this as the years have gone by working in this job, like, the way I'd say it is that the interests of the solicitor, the interests of the client, and my interests as a forensic psychologist are all a bit slightly different. And it's just they diverge at this point of when I'm asked to do this assessment, because often it's like, okay, so the solicitor, follow the money, I guess, in some ways. Solicitors, my opinion, of course, legal people want to help clients as well, and they're trying to kind of put away the bad guys, inverted commas, and they're trying to like help people who they think deserve a chance. Absolutely. But I suppose if a solicitor is a good a name for getting a client a shorter sentence, more people will go to them. So, the solicitor wants to get the client a shorter sentence. The client usually wants a shorter sentence. And then for me, I can often want them to have a shorter sentence, but not in the absence of going to therapy and addressing all the problems, Right. So I want them to rehabilitate, I suppose.
Yes.
And I do believe in the majority of cases that rehabilitation isn't done in prison.
Okay.
I suppose. So,
and when you go in,
yeah.
just to cut across, right?
Yeah.
When you go into these assessments,
yep.
Are you very conscious that you don't want to have any prejudgments? If you hear the profile, let's say, of what this person has done or what they're being accused of or whatever, is it quite a conscious thing for you to consciously try and strip your mind of any judgment, or is it a kind of a thing of, I just don't judge until I sit down with the person anyway?
Yeah, I think at the start. So I'm 34 now. I started as a trainee when I was 24, so 10 years ago. So I've been kind of doing this for 10 years, I suppose. And I think when I started, I would have, I'm sure the same as most people, of course, I had preconceived notions about I suppose, different people who've committed different crimes. But I do actually remember, even back then, because I remember being interviewed for the service that I worked for 5 years, and I remember my boss there interviewing me for and was like, "What do you think of sex offenders?" Like one of the interview questions, And I do actually remember being like, well, I just feeling curiosity, I suppose. And I'm segueing now, but I remember I used to work, prior to that, I did the phone lines for Childline, right. And I don't know, you're probably just going to think I'm very, very straight now, but on Childline, a huge amount of the calls, if I remember, I think it was like 1 in 5 calls are men ringing up and masturbating over the phone, right, on Childline, because it's a free number. And the rule back then in Childline, I think they've changed it since, was that you were never allowed to hang up on anybody. You weren't allowed to hang up the phone. So, it's ridiculous.
You had to basically wait for someone to finish. Yeah. Jesus Christ. Anyway.
And there used to be regular callers. There used to be a man who would tell you that he was a 4-year-old girl, say, and then like some callers saying that they were I remember somebody used to say that they were pretend they were a dragon, and you'd have to it was just all this mad stuff. But any of the kind of I guess, like, I mean, again, maybe it makes me look strange, but any of the kind of I suppose everyone used to be disgusted by the calls of the men who were masturbating that. Yeah, on one level, of course, I was. But I remember just feeling a very strong sense of curiosity about it and thinking, what is going on with this person, that they're in a position in their lives where they have to ring up an anonymous chat line just and need to have the sexual behaviour and somebody to kind of witness it in some way, even if it's just over the phone, Yeah. And just being like, what has gone wrong, I suppose, with that person's development? What are they getting out of it? What needs are being met through this behaviour? That would have definitely overridden any kind of disgust I had back then. And I remember that kind of thinking that when, as I said, my boss interviewed me for this traineeship. It was just curiosity. I was like, well, And it was just coming from the underlying assumption that like something's gone wrong. A healthy, happy person doesn't do these things to other people, I suppose.
Right.
So nowadays, and I guess what I've seen over the years as well with different, working with different people who are come in as trainees as well and stuff. Actually, I started working with I employed somebody there recently, and it was like her first kind of sex offender, and I, as a joke, I just said to her, I was like, I bet you, because she read, so there's something called the Book of Evidence, which is when somebody's committed a crime, it's the book of all the statements of evidence against the person. So it'll include the statement of the victim and different witnesses, and then the guards investigating the case. So you always get the book of evidence before I meet the client. So I'll have read that. And I gave it to my assistant psychologist that I've employed, and I said, I bet her like 50 quid. Because she was like, oh, this person sounds awful and horrible. And I said, I bet you after the start at the end of the first session, you'll like this person. I bet you 50 quid that you will.
I promise you're going to like this sex offender.
Yeah. Basically, and she did. Yeah. She liked him. So
like, this is, again, like literally the same conversation again of removing judgment and trying to seek understanding. Like, you're not judging the person that was masturbating over the phone. And so that's that kind of training that you didn't even realize you were getting at that time. You know what I mean? You know, it's like you're 10 years before you're in this position that you're in now. You're given this opportunity to either meet this person with disgust or actually trying to meet this person with understanding. And that's such a difficult place to get to, I think, for a lot of people, including myself. I'm not saying that I'm not part of that. I find it very, very tough to try and understand where a sex offender is coming from. You know what I mean? With the knowledge that I have of my own, delving into my own mind, I realise how fragile the human mind is as well, and how you know, it can be easily manipulated to do these types of things. So when you get into that with somebody, like, is there any, you know, types of like reoccurring things that you're constantly seeing with people that you're assessing that you can nearly narrow down why this person has you know, come to this point? Like, is there a profile for sex offenders, you know, let's say?
Yeah. Okay, so if you're taking sex offenders, first of all, they're like a diverse population, you know. So
yeah, okay. Well, we'll say to individuals that have sexually assaulted or raped a woman.
Okay,
right.
Yeah.
Is there a particular set of things where they're saying something and it's like that's something ticked off or a red flag of some kind?
Yeah. So again, you start at like the person's very early childhood, and the first thing you're looking at is attachment. So you've probably come across that term.
Attachment theory, yeah.
Attachment theory, yeah. And pretty much any offender really of any variety is probably an insecure attachment. So you have, you know, there's 4 types of attachment broadly. Some research kind of breaks some of them down into further categories, but broadly speaking, you've secure attachment. And then there's 3 types of insecure attachment. So avoidant attachment. So that would be that you have problems with becoming emotionally dependent on other people, and that you're generally kind of more distant and aloof. And if you feel threatened, you'll withdraw. If you feel vulnerable, you'll withdraw. And then you have anxious attachment, which is the opposite of that. So when somebody feels threatened or vulnerable, they cling on. So they get very kind of needy and clingy. You'll see this play out in romantic relationships in adulthood generally. And then there's another type called disorganized attachment, which is a very kind of traumatized type of attachment. That's kind of more extreme, where there could be kind of signs of like aggression and violence and kind of more kind of psychotic elements to it as well. That's more extreme kind of stuff. But so yeah, for sex offenders, first of all, I'd be looking at their attachment. So generally what you'd see is like an avoidant attachment style as well. And then often, I suppose, so a cohort of, I guess, people who've who sexually offend against adult women. So you're looking at, I guess, what was modelled to them in childhood as well, in terms of what romantic relationships should look like. And I suppose you also would be very, very interested in how their parents' relationship was and what they saw, what they witnessed, what sort of behaviour they witnessed between their mum and dad, or whoever kind of was in their life, I suppose. So I'd be paying particular attention to like what behaviours were, if they lived with their parents, what kind of behaviours were modelled to them from their dad to their mother, I suppose. Was their father respectful towards their mother? Did the dad kind of evident any kind of misogynistic behaviours or attitudes? Was there violence there from the dad perpetrated towards the mother? And then also, I would be paying particular attention to the offender's relationship with their mother as well. Okay, because always when you look at crimes that involved kind of one gender predominantly against the other, it's a cliche, but you need to look at the person's relationship with their mom and dad, because your father is like the archetypal male figure in your life, and your mother is the archetypal female figure in your life. So whatever sort of kind of relationship or feelings you have towards your mother, that's kind of generally how you feel about women, maybe in general, you know? So like if you're dating someone new, I'd ask them, I'd be like, tell me about your mother and what you feel about her. That might give you an idea what kind of boyfriend they would be.
Your Tinder date now, first
exactly.
time, right? We just ordered the starters. What's your relationship with your mother like?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Straight in there, no messing.
Yeah,
you know what I mean?
Might wait to the main course now. Like, leave them alone for the starter.
Just before dessert.
Yeah.
That's kind of like, let's just soften it up a bit.
Yeah, exactly. So definitely, if the person had a very difficult relationship with their mother, particularly if it was marked by anger or hatred, unresolved trauma there, anger towards their mother, that's a common feature with men who sexually offend against adult women as well.
Right, okay.
So kind of deficits in being able to be emotionally intimate with women, coming from an insecure attachment, and then kind of unresolved issues with their mother. And then, you see, rape as well is a violent crime, you know, it's not actually just a sexual crime as well.
Yeah.
So, you know, generally the person will have a history of kind of some violence as well. So like being...
violence either perpetrated on them or them being the perpetrator of violence. Could go either way.
It could go either way, yeah. And generally, you know, a lot of the time, that's also true that they could be a victim of, say, sexual abuse themselves as well. So often what you'd see as well is that a victim of sexual abuse will become a perpetrator later in life, and that can be about psychologically trying to kind of regain some of the power or control in the situation as well, and feeling as if they've put the scales even again, I suppose. So I guess all in all, it all comes from trauma and you know, an unhealthy or an abnormal development, I suppose, in childhood. And I guess when you look at, that's the thing, I think, when you look at, sex offenders and sex offences that you hear about in the media, there's a plethora of things that have gone seriously wrong with this person's development, you know, and it's not simply just about, they've misogynistic attitudes or something. It's very much not as simple as that, you know. And what else am I answering your question?
No, you're 100%
here.
No. What I would say is, so like what you're saying there, it makes an awful lot of sense, right? Because like if somebody has that traumatic attachment, has that avoidant attachment, it kind of can make it easier for them to dehumanize somebody.
Yep.
You know, to like think about what they're doing as an act not perpetrated on another human being. And then saying also about this like regaining of control and power. I also see that as, you know, when you're talking about somebody with a history like you have there, like trying to regain that power, they don't realize that that's what they're actually doing, but that's what they're feeling.
Absolutely.
So they're getting that it's going to sound strange to people outside of the psychological circles, but this positive feedback.
Yes.
Positive feedback into themselves. So because and this is me now on the male side of things, right? What I thought from just this very public discussion on, male violence and female victims and things like that of late, I really did feel like, I felt at the first point is that when people were pointing the finger at men, that we were all being tarred with the same brush here, And what I wanted to kind of say was, yes, I may have a role to play in it, as every man has a role to play in changing attitudes and environments. But what I wanted other people to understand is that the people that do these crimes are not, it's not, every man.
Yep.
It's a man that has had a particular upbringing, a particular set of traumatic experiences that has led to this happening. And so do you think that it's worthwhile to separate, let's say, male attitudes and separate, traumatic experiences leading to violent offenders? Do you think that there is a line to be drawn between those two things? Because I feel like a lot of men felt like that they were being called, they were being called fucking offenders. And you know what I mean? I felt like I was being like, I was like, I've never done anything like this, and I never would.
Yeah.
And I felt like, and that was, again, I was judging, so I want to understand. And I suppose from your side of it, like, do you feel that like it is something that, that, let's say, all men have a role to play in changing, the environment and reducing these attacks and reducing these things, and on the other side of it, that there is a particular set of circumstances that have to come about for somebody to do these things?
Yeah. I think, first of all, I completely understand, and I think I can empathize with you when you're saying about like feeling attacked or tarred by the same brush or whatever, and I don't think that's right at all. People really need to see that this is I guess that it is a continuum, as in there's some small similarities between we were actually talking about this at a recent family event as well, so I think I'm quoting my sister here a little bit, but there is some kind of common thread between someone over, say, way in the left, like a man who tells a dirty joke or something, and then a man way over on the right who's pulls a woman who's a stranger off the street and raped her. Maybe there might be the common thing of like some misogynistic attitudes or something there, but somebody who engages in that level of extreme behaviour, as I said, to rape a woman who's unknown to him, no, that person more or less doesn't have, nothing in common with the man over here who's told one dirty joke and, one dirty joke a month or something like that, and they shouldn't be seen as like the same sort of person. And the person who tells a dirty joke should not be seen as someone who's the capacity to commit this violent rape. You're absolutely right. Like, the person who commits the violent rape, since they've been born, it's been multiple events in their life that have funneled them in that direction, I suppose, and led them to that point in their life, really. And more or less, those two people do not have anything in common. And I don't think, I think it's terrible that a man would have to feel that they're being kind of personally attacked and being viewed as a rapist, and all men are rapists, and this kind of idea. I just think that's awful. And I know at the time, what was the woman's name who was murdered? Sarah, I've forgotten her name. The woman in the UK who was murdered by the policeman. I can't remember her name now, but I know at that time there was this kind of whole conversation around male perpetrated violence as well against women. Was coming up, and there was this idea that, like, okay, if you're a woman walking down the street and a man passes you, you don't know if that man poses zero harm to you, or you don't know if that man is is the person who's capable of the violent rape. But the point is, I suppose, that the real violent rapists, like, they're kind of a 1 in 100,000 sort of people. They're not like the everyday person that you're going to come across. So what I would be suggesting to women is, like, to keep the feeling of fear or concern proportionate to the risk. And I think that we have to remember, how the media makes money as well, and the media loves, salacious cases that are really sensational and dramatic and really gruesome. So they're all the cases that are reported, and I think we all know it's very easy if you're just reading those all day in the media to start being kind of brainwashed and start thinking like, oh God, every man is a sex offender and I should never be alone on a street with a man because I'm going to be attacked or something like that. That's just, I think, coming from the knowledge that I have of with my job, I suppose, in dealing with offenders, coming across someone like that a stranger, a man who's going to pull you off the street and rape you, it's just, the chances of that happening to you are just tiny,
Yeah, and I think, look, I can understand where women are coming from in that regard, because it's like, the amount of planes that fall out of the sky are absolutely minimal, but yet there are hundreds of thousands of millions of people that are afraid of flying, right? So I feel like if I was to explain the statistics to somebody who is afraid of being attacked by a man, it wouldn't do anything for them. Because if I was to explain the statistic that more men are actually assaulted than women, that are victims of violent crime.
100%, yeah.
More men are murdered.
Yeah.
Each
100-fold, 1,000-fold.
Yeah. So I think it's like 70% of homicides in Ireland are the victim is a male. The perpetrator is also male most of the time as well, and it's mostly somebody who's known to them, right? So it's one of those things where if I was to explain those statistics to women, I think there is that emotional barrier. Where it's like, okay, if I was to explain to you that, men almost have more cause for concern to be afraid, when they're on their own.
Yes.
But, how do we bridge that gap? That's the question. I really had a sidebar of having you on here as well, of this kind of trying to explain to people that, we can loosen ourselves from the shackles of fear, if you know what I mean? And it's like, how do we explain this? How do we, I suppose without sitting everybody down individually.
Yeah.
It's a tough one to do, isn't it?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. So to kind of explain to people that there isn't that much cause for fear, is it?
Yeah.
Yeah, because I think the danger is that it can really play into, I believe the word is like misandry, isn't it? It's the opposite to misogyny, and it can. We shouldn't be trying to feed an atmosphere of like hating men as well. I mean, that's committing the same folly, isn't it? Because if as women we're saying like, we're challenging that the patriarchy and men hating women, then if we do the same thing back as men, we're committing the same crime, and that's not right. So I think, to answer your question, how can we kind of so sort of ameliorate people's fear, I suppose, and make sure that people aren't acting from a place of fear? I find knowledge, as we're talking about, so like understanding that somebody who ends up committing this type of crime is, it's a very rare case. So and I think that should help somebody, if they're walking down the street as well, to like feel less afraid, I suppose. I think an essential piece of that is that, I think you mentioned it there, the overwhelming majority of cases of rape or violent assaults against women are perpetrated by people known to them, so to be attacked by somebody who's a stranger to you is just like highly, highly, highly unusual. So
I think that's why Aisling Murphy was so shocking.
Yes.
I think why it shocked the country to the core was that it was the archetypal, wasn't it? It was the archetypal fear being lived in real life.
Absolutely, yeah, like the worst case scenario kind of, exactly, archetypal or stereotype of the violent offender. I don't think there's any evidence, so much as we know, of any sexual assault in that case.
Yes.
But yes, of course. I mean, 4 in the day, was bright in a public place, and to be strangled like that, it's absolutely shocking and horrendous. And the worst of the worst thing that your mind could kind of conjure up, I suppose.
Yeah.
But I think for people to realise, as I'm saying, that like if you just look, I suppose, look a bit more to say more as a scientist a little bit about it in terms of the data, in terms of like what sort of, how prevalent these crimes are or how common they are. They're exceedingly not common. So that knowledge can help. And I think then, as you're saying, to come at it with the idea that like people who do commit these crimes, they're unwell. They're not healthy, happy people. They're not well. Things have gone extremely wrong in their development, and that is what has led them to that point. And also the vast majority of them do not want to be that way. They don't want to be committing sexual crimes or violent crimes either. And often they're looking for help. And that's am I just rambling here now? I'll keep rambling.
No. I feel what I would feel as I'm not trying to speak for women here, but I think that like no matter if the statistics are whatever the way they are, I feel like the fear is just still real. It's still a real fear, and it's been ingrained. And so and the reason why I am talking about this, the reason why I'm bringing it up, and the reason why I want to alleviate that is because I love so many women in my life. I have a partner, Mel. I have my mother. I have my nieces. I have friends of mine, and like the idea and thought for me that these women are afraid is there, that's what was in my mind, was like, it doesn't matter sometimes the statistics, because the fear inside in somebody is real, and it's the same for as I said, for people that are afraid of planes falling out of the sky. It's real for them, and it doesn't matter if they go, you're actually more, you're in bigger threat driving your car, it doesn't matter. So like I think that just as there is ingrained trauma in the offender, it probably is the same way for somebody who's in fear, is that it's ingrained in them. It's become their dogma, let's say.
Yeah, absolutely. And like, I should preface this by saying I don't want this to be considered as like victim blaming or anything, but your example there with flying, okay? So if I have a client who has a fear of flying and I'm treating them for that phobia or any phobia, okay, what I'm going to do is, part of it is the psychoeducation piece. So part of it is telling them that there's a tiny chance of the plane crashing. And then the other piece of the therapeutic work will be looking at what is their what associations do they make with flying. Is underlying that fear of death? Obviously, exploring their exposure to people who've died in their lives. What are their thoughts on death? Their relationship to it. Their relationship with grief, and looking into any kind of background negative experiences around flying. So that will be a piece of the work, looking at why that phobia in particular has developed within them. And then another piece of the work, now flying is a bit more harder example to make, but if you had something like, say, a fear of spiders, okay?
Go for it, yeah.
Yeah, what you would start doing is like, you would do, all the work that I just talked about. So like, okay, telling them that only a tiny amount of spiders actually bite you or something like that. And then exploring their experience with spiders and see is that related to any other negative events. And then the other part would be what's called gradual exposure, which is I would show them like a picture of a spider, and then let them be anxious and let that pass, and then we'd like build up the hierarchy of exposure from like a video of a spider, and then to trying to, I don't know, tell them to go into their attic or something where there'd be a load of spiders. So, but I suppose the point I'm making is definitely we focus on the person who has the phobia, who has the fear, and to try to help them explore that a bit more. So I don't want to kind of try to say to women that like, you're just being, it's like a gaslighting thing. You're just being ridiculous by being afraid. I suppose I'm not saying that. But I suppose I am saying like, I guess like look inward a little bit and start to maybe think like what is their own relationship or views towards men, and where have they developed from, and what it's starting probably with their father as well.
Yes, yeah.
And
seeking better understanding of self.
Better understanding of self. Yeah, absolutely. And to try to look at that piece, to understand why the fear is so tangible for them and so real. It's so real.
Yeah. Because I do this is why the conversation is important, because I feel like the fears that women have are not to be brushed under the carpet and they're not to be brushed to the side. And I think both of us have made that clear, that it's not about brushing a fear to the side. It's more understanding it and coming to the point where it's just like a fear of, let's say, flying or spiders or whatever. If we come to understand it and we come to see where it's coming from, like I had a huge, it's so strange, like I had a huge fear that I was going to hit someone with my car.
Okay.
For ages, and I had invasive thoughts surrounding it, where I'd be in the middle of my car and I'd be driving and someone could be walking on a footpath 10 meters away from me.
Right.
And I would be like, I'd get this burst of like hitting them in my head.
Yes, like an intrusive imagery or intrusive thought
absolutely.
around it. Yeah.
And so I said to myself, okay, well, let's just leave the thought in, right? And let's see how does that thought make it happen?
Exactly, yeah.
Right? And so I was like, okay, next time you pass somebody now, really sit into it. Really be there. Don't try and rush it and push it out the door, right? And, it doesn't matter. Like, people could say that's a really weird thing to fear, right? It's a weird thing to fear. And I don't know where it comes from. But I had this kind of a fear of hurting somebody, right? So I fed into it and fed into it more, and just kind of like where it was coming from, why it was all this way, and it was coming from because this is what I think it came from, was I had such a disregard for my life for a long time. I had suicide ideation. I thought about taking my own life numerous times. And I had gotten to a point, and this is only in the last 3 or 4 years, where I really liked my life. I really enjoyed it, and I really felt like it was going great. That I think it wasn't necessarily a fear of hitting someone with my car. It was a fear of something happening and ruining my life.
Yeah.
That it was.
You had so much to lose now.
I had so much to lose now. Yes, I had so much now where I was just loving getting up in the morning, and I hated getting up in the morning, and I love it now, and I love tying up my shoelaces and going for a run. I love the people in my family. I love all of the things about life that I just thought I just didn't want something catastrophic to fucking fuck it up. You know what I mean? And it seems such a weird thing. It's like, how do you tie that feeling with what I was thinking? Only by letting it in and understanding was I able to get to that point, and to the point where I'm driving my car around the place and it just doesn't give me a passing thought.
Okay.
Overtaking cyclists and all this kind of stuff, and things that I found difficult before, which is so strange to talk about, because I haven't talked about it openly really very much.
And did you find the awareness, Con, was enough for you for the anxiety then to leave you?
Took a while.
Okay.
I needed to become aware. I needed to actually let it in first. So I needed to actually stop trying to push it out. And it's like, just like driving my car, and I was like, right, just don't think about hitting this person.
Okay, yeah, of course. And it's like, if you're told don't think about something, you just
don't think about purple elephants.
Yeah,
do you know what I mean? It's like boom, straight away. So I'm just like, I just had to just let it happen.
Yeah.
Okay, you're gonna think about it, and it's not gonna happen though. So just keep going and keep going. And the more I thought about it, the more I thought about the idea of that. It's because I love my life now. I don't want anything to wreck it. You know what I mean? And what I actually had to fucking realize was the only person who has the control and power of the way your life goes is you. And it's not going to be like you just mowing someone down in your car, And as soon as I realized that, and as soon as I became aware of that, it just started to soften up. It wasn't a overnight switch.
Yep.
It just became softening up, where the intrusive thoughts might even still come in now, but it's not even a thing.
Yeah, and it's fine, because we are not our thoughts,
Absolutely, yeah.
We're responsible for our responses to our thoughts, but we're not kind of responsible for the initial thought to begin with. And to go down the road of trying to suppress our thoughts, is a bad idea and doesn't really work at all. It's interesting though that you said, that the awareness of it was enough to kind of treat the issue and to reduce the anxiety, because that's often the issue with psychotherapy. So what you're trying to do is you're trying to build awareness, build self-awareness, bring what's in the unconscious into conscious awareness. And often with people, that's enough for the problematic behavior that they've come to seek help for it to resolve, as it did in your case, I suppose. But again, it's if the person has a more kind of complex history and more trauma and more issues, that's when it gets harder, and often the awareness isn't enough, and then you have to kind of, they need to be in therapy more, and almost you kind of have to be a supervisor in their life, if you like, that they need to kind of come back to you, and they're accountable to you, if you like, and you kind of, speak on a week-to-week basis about, right, how did you put your awareness into practice this week, and you might design kind of like homework exercises for them as well and stuff like that to test out their new, to see if they can act differently based on the new awareness that they have as well.
Yeah.
But
and it's strange as well, just to get in. If I'm going through a stressful time,
yep,
I'll
re-emerge again, will it?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
If I'm in a stressful place or whatever the case may be, and it's actually kind of it's a bit of a blessing in disguise, because when I know that that it's getting more prevalent, I know that it's time for me to really face. Really try and deal with what stresses are happening in my life, and see if there's any way that I can alleviate them, if there's any measures or steps that I can take,
Exactly.
So like what I kind of gain, what I kind of see this transferability of what I was kind of going through to women that might have a really crippling fear about going out on their own or any of these type of things, is like, should like, it's very, very difficult, because like I'm the reason why I got you on as well, is like I'm a man, like, and I can't live a woman's life, and I don't know what a woman feels, when they're going down the street. But it's like, understanding of anything, I think uncertainty can be a fear in itself, and so like being uncertain about whether someone's going to cause me harm or not, that's enough in itself to cause the fear, whether you're talking about somebody's wielding a sword coming down the road at you, or whether somebody is, a foot shorter than you and is, poses no immediate threat. The fear is still there, like, just getting back as well to what you kind of do with, in terms of your work, right?
Yep.
With people, like, how do sexual offenders, pedophiles, I'm kind of lumping everybody into the one thing, and we'll just put them into a big sex offender soup here, a bit of pedophiles here and a bit of this here. Anyway,
pinch of pedophilia.
Just a little pinch of that.
And a dollop of something else.
Yeah, just a dollop of rape and whatever.
Yeah.
Look, what I would say is, like, these are very, very serious crimes, very serious illnesses as well attached to them, right?
Yes.
How do they feel about themselves? More, how do they feel about what they do?
Yeah. So I think I might have talked about this in Lydia's podcast as well. There's something I'm looking out for with a lot of different, with mostly all offenders I'm looking at as well, is kind of, where they would be on a psychopathy scale, if you like, so how much remorse are they capable of, and that often comes from, it does come from their ability to empathize with other people, and then that's sort of separate to the kind of crime they've committed, if you like. So often solicitors don't refer clients to me who would be very kind of psychopathic, like the ones who probably just don't actually give a shit about what they did, and have the view that you go through life taking what you want, and it's, this kind of mentality that's a kind of it's me or them, dog eat dog kind of world, I suppose. Often that can develop in somebody, sadly, if they've been to generally if they've been to like different care homes. So if like they lost both their parents are absent in their lives from birth, and they didn't have any kind of positive adult influence in their life in early years, and if they were put into care, and often if they're put into like residential care and then moved to different, into state care and moved to different residential homes, every year or two, whatever. So they've never built up any kind of attachment with any person in their life, and they've never felt safe or secure. So they've grown up with the attitude that, like, that they just have to, they're in survival mode all the time. They're just trying to survive. They don't view people, everyone is dehumanized to them. It's just about like, how can they get their basic needs met and survive, and they'll take advantage of anybody to meet those needs, I suppose. So people like that who commit a sex offence or a violent offence, they're probably not going to feel any remorse really. And there's some people who are, I'm saying a load of things at the same time here, but there are some people unfortunately who are beyond rehabilitation, and that for me was a really difficult thing to accept when I first started working in this job, because I was very much like, oh, look at all the rescue doggies, I'm just going to get them.
I'll take this person home now and
exactly. And I was
feed
like,
them and water them and
exactly, and I just thought, oh no, I'll just keep like banging out the unconditional love, and they'll turn around and they'll be remorseful for this crime, and they'll want to work on the factors that led them there. So for that was a lot of the feedback I got from my supervisor when I started as a trainee. She was just like, Ríoghnach, you're being too idealistic,
really?
yeah, and realizing that some people are beyond help, much like physical illnesses as well. Some diseases they go too far to a point, and you just can't save the person, and that's it. So those people generally aren't referred to me. So I suppose I'm only seeing one kind of cohort of offenders, if you like, generally the more remorseful ones, and but sometimes offenders kind of slip through the net and will be referred to by solicitors, because maybe they have got the impression that person is quite remorseful and psychologically minded. But once I
which are sometimes the most dangerous of them, really, because it's like they're able to masquerade almost.
Yes, absolutely, yeah, and it's only when I start sitting down with them for numerous hours over an extended period of time. And I've collected the cluttered information from the people that they know, and I've done the personality tests. I do an IQ test as well, but a lot of people do, I forgot to say. But that one really, usually these people actually have higher IQ actually, because they're able to walk the walk or talk the talk, I suppose, and try to kind of fool people a bit.
Everybody now is getting the Christian Bale American Psycho type view of this person. Yes. Now is able to just trot around the place in the expensive suits and then on the sly be doing all of the bad things.
Exactly, yeah. And yes, so those people who really don't have any kind of remorse, they're more unusual as well. Like the vast majority of offenders do not want to be living their lives like that, particularly with sexual offences, because it's in some way it's actually easier to, in a lot of ways, it's easier to rehabilitate someone if they've committed a sexual offence as opposed to kind of a violent offence, because in a lot of communities violence is normalised and often glorified as well, and it's the primary method of asserting oneself and obtaining respect from others and power and status. So it's very hard for someone living in a community like that who's committed a violent crime for you to kind of come in and convince them that like violence isn't the way, you know, because you're kind of going against everything that that's been modeled to them and ingrained in them from a young age. While with sexual offences, there aren't really any communities or societies that say it's okay to sexually offend against women, like even in, you might know this, but even in the prison system, the sex offenders are always on the bottom rung of the hierarchy within prisons.
Okay.
Yeah, so like in our Irish prisons, the sex offenders, this is the world over, are kept separate to the other offenders. So within that hierarchy, then if you've sexually offended against an adult woman, that's kind of like the least worst one, and if you've sexually offended against a child, you're really at the bottom dregs of the prison world, I suppose. Yeah. And often those people will be assaulted by other prisoners in prison as well. So I guess the point I'm making is that it can be easier to rehabilitate sexual offenders, because at least they're not living within a system that promotes their behaviour, Mm-hmm. Pretty much. I mean, basically all the clients that I see would be remorseful. highly remorseful, and
feel terrible about themselves in that
absolutely way. Feel, and this, of course,
guilt.
So much insane amount of guilt, insane amount of shame, sorrow, remorse, disgust. Like the disgust is really a kind of quite visceral thing, and a lot of my work with offenders then, and the people would probably think this is would probably just say, oh, fuck them as well in this scenario. But a lot of my work with offenders say after they've come out of prison, because I work in the community, I don't work in prisons. When I see them after they've come out of prison or if they've got a suspended sentence, is trying to convince them that it's okay for them to move on with their lives in a kind of a obviously positive, rehabilitated way, because often they won't. They will never allow themselves to like go to a restaurant to have a nice meal or like meet a friend to do something in public, or even in private, because they feel like they don't deserve to ever be happy again, because they're like, I did this to someone else. And how does that make me, I ruined this other person's life, or did this horrible, heinous thing to somebody. I have no right to enjoy a nice steak or whatever cocktail or whatever they like. And a lot of my work with ex-offenders is to try to say, like, look, first of all, you've kind of done the time, if you like, but that's not really, for me as a psychologist, that's not the point. For me, it's like, have you done the work on yourself, the therapeutic work on themselves? And, I'm trying to tell the client, you've been coming to therapy for, a year, 2 years, you've worked on all the contributing factors, and I have to try to get them to find a way. It's a bit like, I think, like the 12-step program. I have to push them towards identifying a way that they feel like they're making amends, that they're giving back to society, and they're setting things right for the wrong for the destruction that they've caused.
Yeah, in their own mind. First.
In their own mind, yeah. And they need to, we go to the word forgiveness, I suppose, and can they forgive themselves, I suppose, for what they have done. What they have done, yeah.
Yeah, because like I think for me, like this is just speaking from my person, I haven't thought about sex offenders or in particular, as you said, the bottom rungs, pedophiles. I haven't thought about them as human beings in my mind. I've thought about them as the anti-human, as the perpetrator of ills against human beings, right? So that's the way I have thought about them, being honest about it, and now trying to seek more understanding. Like, there must be an awful lot of self-hatred, self-loathing, like guilt and shame felt by these people. And so do you think that if they don't deal with that, that they are more likely to get into a behaviour that would lead them to reoffend?
Yes. Yep, exactly.
Because I know you did your thesis was surrounding stigma and that as a contributing factor to reoffending.
Absolutely.
Could you discuss that a bit? Because that's very interesting to me.
Yeah, that's what I did my doctoral thesis on. So it was about the stigmatization of sex offenders, and I know that sounds, you would think that you wouldn't have an issue with stigmatizing sex offenders, but I guess the issue is like their behavior is not at all acceptable. But we don't want to dehumanize the whole person, I suppose. And the idea that what I discussed and kind of explored in that piece of research was that the more we push away offenders out of society, so the more we say that, like, they can't have a job, or we don't allow them to have friendship groups or to live somewhere safely and securely, we destabilize them more, and that pushes up their risk of reoffending. So it's actually counterintuitive what we're generally doing as a society, particularly any type of vigilantism. All that does is pushes up a risk, the risk of the person reoffending. Because I have something here actually. What is that? I forgot to put it up here. So I brought this with me, actually.
Yeah, that's all good. The paperwork.
Yeah, the paperwork. Just thought I could read it out to people. But so when you're talking about risk factors of reoffending, there's what's known as static factors, which are kind of aspects of the person's personality or functioning that you can't change, such as their age. So the risk of sexual offending, is high during somebody's 20s and then really drops. There's a lot of testosterone. If we're talking about men and offending, testosterone is like one of the main
fuels.
Fuels, yes, of violence and sexual offences as well. But the other risk factors for sexual offending are changeable factors that are kind of current. So like some of those would be what social influences the person has in their life, their capacity for a stable relationship, misogynistic attitudes, general social rejection, lack of concern for others, that's empathy, impulsivity, poor problem skills, negative emotionality, so propensity towards negative emotions, and then issues like using sex as coping, and sexual preoccupation. So these are all things that you can work on in therapy, but they're also to do with like, they also relate to, I guess, how we're responding as a society to sex offenders. So if we push them away, we're upping their social rejection. We're reducing the amount of positive social influences that they can have in their life. We're going to lead them back if they're prone to like depression or anxiety or towards like issues with anger or hostility. We're going to up the likelihood of that happening as well. So
we're asking people to do very difficult things.
We are.
I've been asking a lot of people, surrounding fears, and I think we're both again now asking a lot of people around stigmas of these things, because myself would find it very difficult to sit down with somebody who's perpetrated a violent offence against a woman or a child. I would find it very difficult to.
I should bring you to work one day.
Do you know what? Bring me. It's a go to fucking work with mommy and daddy day kind of type job, And I'll sit down and I'll try and keep my mouth shut.
I bet you 50 quid as well. I'll be rich after this. Betting everyone 50 quid. You'll like that sex offender. After you talk to him for an hour.
We play a game of like the sex offender. No, it's like for me. I do think that it would be a struggle for me to make that leap. But on the other side of it, completely removing emotion and thinking about it totally practically, if we do want to improve the environment surrounding, sex offenders and reoffending and dropping the level of offences,
Yep.
it might actually be what's necessary.
It is what's necessary. Yeah, absolutely. And like, I think for some people, you can win them over with the attitude of, what we've been talking about, like, okay, this person is unwell and sick, and that's how they've ended up a point of their life where they've committed this crime. And you can win over some people with that argument, but for other people, you have to win them over with the arguments of like the cold hard facts, which is like, well, actually, this is just how you reduce the risk of recidivism, of reoffending. You know, and it's not that we just want the person to kind of have a nice life because they deserve it and they're a human being, but we're actually talking about, well, that's how you keep all the rest of us safe, basically.
This is it. And like the thing is, that type of language doesn't sit well with the media. They want sensationalizing things.
Absolutely.
They want people clicking stuff. They want people reading things. They want people, and like there's, there is maybe a certain level of. I would click an article that says how embracing sex offenders can reduce sex offences. Do you know that would be that I would clickbait the shit out of
would
that.
You?
Do you know,
Okay.
I would be clicking into that.
Maybe I need to put my doctoral thesis into a little article form, a little small.
Make it as easily digestible as possible. Get someone from the Star to rewrite it or something, or someone from the fucking Daily Mirror to succinctly put it into a paragraph. But it's like, this is fucking useful information. And it's not being communicated by the media, because the media wants you to hate the offender, and wants you to demonize them, and doesn't want to actually face how we make the problem, how we alleviate the problem.
Exactly, yeah. And the media is very responsible for creating the issue of vigilantism and for destabilizing the sex offenders' lives and actually pushing up their risk of recidivism, particularly by, there's the whole question of like, should we be actually reporting the names of people who commit all these crimes? Now you've the other brigade of people who want, a public list of all the people who've committed whatever sort of offences, and I'm absolutely entirely against that, because that just leads to vigilantism, where you have people going around graffitiing people's homes, vandalising their homes, homes of offenders, verbally abusing them on the street, and also we have to remember these offenders, in the vast majority of cases, have families. They have a wife, they have children, and when you go and vandalise their home, you're vandalising a small child's home as well. you know, who didn't do anything, doesn't deserve any of this. So it's not just the offender in isolation as well, you know, and we call that in forensic psychology the secondary victims of an offence, which is generally the offender's family, or the victim's family as well, you know.
Yeah. I'm going to play devil's advocate here.
Please do.
And I'm going to be a person who has a sex offender, somebody who I want to talk as well at a certain point about pornography, right? Because I talked about this with friends of mine, with my father and things like that. I think it's a very interesting topic. But anyway, if I was just playing devil's advocate here, if I am somebody here listening to this podcast who has a child sex offender living, like a paedophile living in the same neighborhood as me who has children, let's say, I'm not going to be happy about it. And how do we get to those people? You know what I mean? To the people, because it's grand me saying it. I live out in a fucking cabin in the woods. Like, I don't live near anybody or whatever. I don't have to. If somebody moves in, you know, to my locality, they're probably 2 kilometers away.
Okay, yeah.
So it's like, for me, I'm so far removed from it. I don't have any children either. So it's like, none of my immediate family has been like involved with a serious sexual offense. So it's like, for people that are in that, how do you convert the wicked? You know, how do we because like, for me, it's difficult for me now. I'm talking about it with you. We need to destigmatize sexual offenders. But for me, honestly, I'm thinking, I don't know if I'm ready to make that leap. How do we help people like me make that leap?
Yes. If I had children, and if I was living near someone who I knew had sexually abused a child, I would, if I knew that they were in therapy, like that's the key difference, you know, because if the offender isn't in therapy, yeah, they are a risk. They are a risk to your child. I can't tell you that they're not, I suppose, you know. Okay, there's varying degrees of risk depending how many of these risk factors that I've read out apply to them. Yeah, what can you say to that? If we knew as a society that the offenders were being kind of monitored and by therapists, I suppose, and that it was mandated that they attend therapy, you know, by the probation service or whatever, then I would be more happy and I would feel comfortable about it.
So, do you think that we're failing in our responsibility to these people?
Yes, I do think the criminal justice system is failing. All we have to offer really is, you know, we've prison sentences, and all that happens in prison is that you just warehouse somebody. You just put them in. Particularly, this applies to people who've sexually offended. Yeah, you've put them into prison, and they have to, you know, there's a punishment element there, but they don't, unless your sentence is over kind of like 5 years, you might get into what's called the Building Better Lives program in prison, which is a group therapy program for men who've sexually offended. And then you might get on the community version of that, which is the Safer Lives program, but only a tiny proportion of men do get on that program. So the vast majority go into prison, they might serve a year-long sentence, and then they come out, and then they're just left to their own devices, and that's it. And
I would imagine it would be an unpopular thing in the Dáil to go, we need to invest in sex offenders.
Yeah,
you know, it would be. It's not. I wouldn't like to be that counsellor, you know, who brings that bill, you know, to this. But like your working day to day with these people, you've written a doctoral thesis that has stood up that, you know, shows the direct links between stigma and reoffending. Does the narrative need to change? You know what I mean? Does the narrative need to change? And we need to go, here, look, we actually need to reintegrate these people into society, or we'll just have, you know, it will just be a continuing circle.
Yeah, which it is. You know, all those type of crimes are on the rise, unfortunately. You know, so, and it'll just get worse and worse, I think, until we change the narrative around it, and we see that, like, okay, you know, these people need to be viewed as people who are sick and unwell, not and that they need our care might be too strong of a word, but they need to be, their needs aren't being met, and something has gone wrong with them, and we need to try to heal them, I suppose, and to treat the wound that they have in order for them to get better. You know, we need, and I think that people have come around to that idea with people who are in addiction, you know, because obviously when people are in an active addiction, they do horrible things to other people as well, you know, because the fixation is just on how do I get more heroin, and you know they don't view other people as humans anymore. They're just trying to take advantage of them so that they can get money together to pay for more heroin. And I think that people now see that, like, okay, when people are in addiction are unwell and sick, and when they recover from addiction, they see that all those behaviours, those destructive behaviours, aren't present within the person anymore. Now, they could be present in some of those people who are just assholes.
Yeah, absolutely. There are going to be a certain percentage of people that are just box tickers that are kind of going, oh, I have to do this or whatever, blah, blah. But they're, I know. There are, you know, that is the human condition that, like, you know what I mean? We're all different.
Yeah. And I think that, so what I'm trying to say, sorry, is that the way the mentality is kind of shifted around addiction, that kind of needs to happen with violent offenders and sexual offenders as well, where people need to change how they view people who commit these offences to, okay, that person is sick and unwell, and okay, because of their illness, they're doing a destructive, harmful behaviour has come out of their illness, I suppose.
Yeah.
It's a bit like what I like to say is that, you know, humans have kind of their own unique way of expressing their joy or distress, and that kind of depends on all the influences that they've had in their life beforehand, I believe. So, you know, for you talked about when you're kind of stressed, this kind of phobia of knocking someone down in your car, you know, reemerges, I suppose. It just so happens that how your distress is expressed doesn't harm anybody but you. It only just makes you anxious to drive, you know. But I suppose for people who've, you know, for sex offenders, when they're experiencing distress, it just so happens that the way their distress manifests is in this very destructive behaviour towards other people, you know, and that's how we have to see that we have to target the reason why they're experiencing distress, why they've ended up in that point of their life where they're manifesting this kind of destructive behaviour towards other people.
Yeah, I think I think that's going to be something that will take a long time. You know what I mean? Obviously, look, you're in the situation where you're you know, you're holding that banner. You're not exactly like, you know, an advocate for these people or whatever the case be, but you just understand them better than the layperson. You know what I mean? And I think that's, if we can bring about that more of that understanding, and, you know, maybe like, because I listened to you on Lydia's podcast and you were discussing much the same thing, and I found it. I found that I had to, I was getting objections from myself as to why that's not the case, or why it shouldn't be, you know, we shouldn't fucking allow these people back into life, and they should be ostracized and whatever the case may be. But then when you were saying more and more about that type of ideology really does cause people to reoffend, and we're actually doing ourselves a disservice by doing that, and the statistics are there and the things. That really did make me think, okay, right, we have to really think about our judgments here, and we have to kind of seek more understanding. You know what I mean? And I think that's a huge kind of common thread through this whole thing.
Yeah.
You know? And
again, coming back to the media, when you have media using terms like, oh, this monster, this predator, this you know, devil, this you know, all these sorts of words, those words dehumanize the person as well. And I think, that's what I'm trying, casting my mind back. That was a lot of what the doctoral thesis was around, the kind of theory around stigma and how it works. And it's about dehumanizing a person, as you say. So the media really, if you're consuming that sort of media that's just telling you buzzwords like that, you know, like, and very emotive words like monster, and describing people in these ways, how can you view that person as like a whole person who's committed a horrible destructive behaviour, but that's not who they are in total, you know? So I don't know, back to giving out about the media.
Yeah. Well, look, I think, to be honest with you, like, nobody's going to argue with us with us bashing the media, because look, the media has a part to play in nearly everything. You know what I mean? And I do really think that, you know, why I love the podcast space is because I don't have any agenda or ideology. I'm not left or right or fascist or socialist or whatever. It's just having a chat, and and these are the free exchange of ideas, surrounding these things. And like what I would seek from people is that are listening to the podcast. There's some really complicated ideas being raised in this podcast already, and just to try and seek on better understanding. Our immediate judgments. My immediate judgment was, fuck these people. I don't care about them. They're not welcome in my reality. And yet, if I do that, I am doing somebody else, a future victim down the line, a disservice. It's such a weird way to look at it, right? But yet, if we do look at it in that way, I'm not saying fucking swing your arm around the next sex offender and bring them out for a coffee. I'm just saying, maybe we could just actively not fucking hate somebody in that way and try and seek more understanding of where they're coming from. Because as we discussed earlier in the podcast, there is multiple things that have had to go wrong.
Absolutely, yeah. And I think, people always come back to the idea of like, how could you do that to another person? And one of the main ways that something that facilitates somebody doing something horrible to someone else is like by a lack of empathy, but a lack of empathy comes from a lack of awareness of your own emotions. So, and I think that's helpful to tell people as well, so that if you have very limited awareness of your own emotions, that means you have very limited awareness of other people's emotions, right. and that comes from, so we have to be reminded of that as well. And that comes from a person's trauma generally, that they've just shut themselves down emotionally. They can't, the idea of experiencing their emotions is too overwhelming. Either it's going to drive them to suicide or it's going to drive them to a psychotic episode. So it's a defense mechanism for the person to shut down their emotional awareness. But unfortunately, with that comes shutting down their ability to empathize then with other people also.
Yeah.
And the foundations for being aware of your own emotions come again from the secure attachment, usually with the mother, but like a primary caregiver as well. Like you think about, a baby, and when it's upset or distressed, the mother will say, are you sad? Are you angry? So the mother will name the emotion to the young child, and that's the kind of foundation for somebody being able to identify their own emotions as well.
Right.
It's because they've been kind of named and witnessed, I guess, by the other person in this kind of secure, safe bond, I suppose.
Yeah, there's a book. Now the author escapes me, but the name of the book is "They Fuck You Up."
Right.
It's in psychology. Is that it's basically about your parents.
And
it's basically about that. Like we are a vast majority of our personalities, like from when we were younger. Like literally, they don't start at 5 or 6. They start at like
a 0
birth.
Yeah,
you know what I mean. And
minus so even because it's the influences. If the mother is a very anxious person or has chronic issues with anxiety, they have more cortisol running through their body all the time. That gets through the placenta into the baby as well, and affects how the baby is developed also. So the baby is born anxious, if you like.
Yeah. And that's the thing. It's like there's that there's a absolute myriad of different factors that are brought into to when someone ends up sitting across from you, there's so many different things that have happened. You know what I mean? And like from 0 all the way up. And I think when we hear about something like a terrible crime, I don't think, Jesus, wow, that person who that offender there must have had an awful time and must have had a terrible childhood and must have had all these things happen. I think about the victim, I do think about like, Jesus Christ, that poor woman or that poor boy or that poor man, whatever it is. It doesn't have to be a sexual offense. Anything like that, I just think about, we're thinking about the victim, but maybe, if I'm going to get anything from the conversation personally, is maybe I will seek more understanding of the person that I am leaning towards hating them. And so maybe I'll just try and kind of take that kind of like more backseat. And on another scale, right? Because I feel like, there are certain things, because I talked about this with my father, there are certain things that I can do as a man that will help create a better environment for women, right? And I think we touched on it very, very quickly on my podcast, My Father, surrounding like pornography, right? And I know that you talked about this with Lydia and stuff. And I also heard on another podcast, Jordan Peterson had another psychologist on, and he was talking about how, you know, men are 60% more likely to get a divorce if they you know use pornography regularly. Generally, all I have heard is that the use, or especially overuse of pornography, is an incredibly damaging thing for people. Could we speak on that a bit, maybe?
Yes, I completely agree with you. I try to have maybe an open-minded attitude towards pornography, and I try to come at it with the same idea of, like, you know, alcohol or another drug, where it's like it's okay just to use it in moderation, I suppose, and that, like, generally the problem with if somebody's addicted to a substance, the problem lies within the person, not the substance itself. But I do find, from my work, definitely, that pornography I would have to say, is like a very kind of insidious and kind of negative influence for people. So not to kind of get into it too much, because we won't talk about the paedophiles too much, but people there's kind of an epidemic of people viewing child pornography, and it's on the rise completely. And a lot of that starts with an addiction to adult pornography, and then it's that the person seeks out something increasingly deviant or shocking, so they'll move into more it's like kind of deviant forms of pornography, and that can often lead them to viewing child pornography as well. So that's been kind of documented now. That's kind of a new area of research, I suppose, looking at how viewing child pornography comes out of an addiction to adult pornography. But there's multiple problems with it. You know, I think it's in terms of just talking about adult pornography now, in terms of kind of objectifying women. Often pornography is more just about the male orgasm, and how men are satisfied sexually as well. So that can be a huge, if you want to talk about that too, definitely a huge issue, where, like, in sexual encounters there is more limited focus on the woman's pleasure as well, and we're generally more complicated beings in terms of orgasm as well. So it's taking away from what realistic expectations of sex, I suppose, and what it can do as well then for men is that men have a kind of, I guess, an expectation around how sex should be, and then the reality of sex doesn't add up to that unrealistic expectation. So then for men, what's often happening is that problems with erectile dysfunction as well. So it's really kind of pornography is really warping, I think, men's ideas of what a sexual encounter should be, and then also kind of feeds into seeing women only as sex objects, I suppose, or objectification. Like, we all objectify each other to some degree, and that's fine as long as it goes along with subjectification.
Yes, well, absolutely.
So it's like, I think you're sound and I think you're hot. Whatever, that's fine.
It's like you see a guy or you see a girl in a coffee shop, like, whoa, this person's beautiful, or whatever. You know what I'm saying? I don't think that's normal in terms of like, we are animals and sexual animals, and we reproduce and all of the base level stuff. But I do think that's for young fellas, like 14, 15, 16, 17 years old, and they're first, like, they might have 5 or 6 years before they have their own sexual experience of looking at other people's sexual experience through the eyeglass of pornography.
Yes.
I think that's very, I can only imagine what somebody who is 18 or 19 years of age having their first sexual experience is going to think about themselves after that. You know what I'm saying? That awkward fumbling.
Yeah, exactly. And she's not screaming in pleasure. I've performed poorly then, or something.
Like, that is just an absolute ego buster in you know what I mean? And I think that's huge. Like, I think it's a dangerous thing, because it creates this idea around for men, and I think that it can be destroying on an ego. And so, like, having those disappointing things, or maybe like even an element of rejection, as you said there now, a woman who's, you know, not getting any pleasure from it whatsoever, and he has this expectation built up in his head. Do you feel like that could be a contributing factor to somebody developing an unhealthy relationship with pornography or women or whatever? Like, you know, do you think that this idea that's been built up and then being shattered,
this idea of how the sexual encounter should go, is it?
Or how they should be in the sexual encounter, and how they should perform, and then them not living up to that?
Yeah, well, I mean, definitely, as you say, it can really play a role in terms of, I guess, self-esteem and feelings of what they view to be, you know, how to be a man or how to be masculine, I suppose. And again, it just puts the focus too much on like kind of like extreme, what would you say, like you know, like over the top sexual acts, I suppose, instead of more more intimacy, I suppose.
Yes.
And I'm not trying to say like, oh, you should only have sex if you love the person or anything, like, not at all. Obviously, it's fine to have casual sex.
Yes.
No sex before you're married.
This is Ireland. We're full of Catholic shame, and we need to continue that.
Yeah. But I think that it's just that, again, that unrealistic view and of what sex should be or should look like. So the man, I would say, you'd be able to speak more to this being a man, but you know, it probably just leads to like feelings of disappointment or inadequacy. And the danger then is that if you can't communicate that to your partner, I suppose, that's kind of the issue then, you know, what happens to those feelings of kind of rejection or inadequacy then, like where do they go, or where do they manifest elsewhere? Speaking
from my point of view, from my perspective as a man, I feel like for my 20s and things like that, I found it very, very kind of I had no judgment surrounding casual sex. You know, I felt like, you know, if I was having casual sex with somebody else, we were both kind of, you know, we're both, you know, consenting, and we're both getting the same thing from it, or whatever the case may be. I did find the idea of intimacy quite different and quite far more complicated. And I feel like that's the you know, one of the crux of this whole thing is that sexual activity and intimacy are completely different. You know what I mean? And like the idea that, you know, that they're the same thing, that might be a line that might be blurred, you know. But I do feel like there is an awful lot of, because of the way that pornography as well is structured and things like that, there is an awful lot of expectation on the male to have like a big penis and to be able to be fucking rock hard every time and all this kind of stuff. And it's like these types of perceptions, like I feel like they could be damaging. I'm kind of putting your cap on here now for a second. I am thinking like if there was somebody who has had that rejection, huge rejection or repeated rejection, they might, you know, victimize, demonize women. They might, you know, have this kind of a skewed view of women, and that might lead them to be, you know, to offend and things like that. So I do feel like it, you know, it can have that type of effect. But I think the more prevalent effect is the effect, the normal, let's say, everyday effect on people, you know, on men's perceptions. Yeah, I definitely think so. And I suppose it comes back to that idea that we were just talking about there about dehumanizing. It kind of, I think a lot of pornography, if you like, might like dehumanize the woman in the situation, I suppose. And then that can feed into, just misogynistic attitudes. Just one listed here in the risk factors, you know, where this idea of like, well, women are here to serve my sexual desires, I suppose, you know, and that's about it or whatever. So that's how I think pornography can kind of distort or warp a man's view things as well. And particularly just, as you said, that kind of critical developmental period in adolescence. And with
with the sex offenders that I see when I'm doing these assessments with them and going through their life history, I pay particular attention to those years. So like after puberty, when the person becomes sexually aware, you know, right. And then what was their experiences around if they identify as straight, you know, for just go with that, you know, what was their experiences then with girls, with women? Were they comfortable with women? Did they ever feel kind of rejected? Did they have female friends? And then whether they're kind of start viewing pornography at that stage of development as well. And often you see what will happen as well is like people will say, oh, it's easier to go and watch pornography and masturbate than actually have to go and talk to a girl and try to, you know,
pull them.
Exactly. Get into a situation where you could be naked with them or whatever. So it's almost like, oh, it's just easier just to go to pornography, you know, and that means the person doesn't have as many. They develop social skills deficits then as well, and they're not getting to know and appreciate women or females also, you know. Yes, it's something else that just popped into my head that I've kind of mentioned before. This is really exactly to do with this, but I have a real bee in my bonnet about single sex schools as well. I just think it's absurd to segregate males and females, you know, because in any other area we've never said that segregation leads to mutual understanding or respect or compassion. Do you know what? It only breeds.
I think everybody can agree that apartheid
was a bad idea.
Was a bad idea. You know what I mean? Like, absolutely. I think that's well, I went to an all boys school. And
you Christians,
went to an all girls school.
We could tell your listeners we established that we went to schools across the road from each other.
Literally 100 meters away. And I think that is it's so strange you bring that up. I never thought about it in that way before, you know. And I think I think from being in an all boys school, like, and you know, obviously there was 2 all girls schools, very very close proximity. It was so strange that like the times in the morning times or whatever, and you'd be hanging out with each other.
Yeah, at the shop.
By the shop. It was like it was just different, you know. It was just a different. You'd see lads even acting ways you'd never see them act inside in the classroom with all the boys around.
Yeah,
you know what I mean?
Yeah,
it was so strange. And I think that, like, to pose the opposite question, do you think that somebody who's going to a mixed school has a better idea of the opposite sex?
I do, absolutely, 100%. Because they're more likely to have friends that are girls, you know. So they're
girls are more likely to have friends that are guys.
Friends are guys, of course, yeah. It works both ways, and they're more likely to feel comfortable with the opposite sex. And when they have friendships with the opposite sex, and you have to, you know, inherent in a friendship is respect and understanding, you know. So, again, the likelihood of them viewing women as objects for sex and women viewing men as objects for sex, the likelihood of that is lessened because they actually have formed, you know, friendships and positive relationships, and you know, and then you're just exposed to different people with all different backgrounds and all the rest of it. Like I often think I was saying to you, I have a twin brother, and I think that, you know, I grew up where we always shared the same friend group, you know, so I always equally had as many friends who were guys as girls, and I think that was great for me, and it's funny because I meet other groups of friends and they say, maybe not so much when they're older, but maybe a bit younger, even in their 20s, they'd be like, oh, I'm, you know, a guy is like, oh, I'm just going out with the lads or something. That was unheard of in your group of friends. The guys would never just go out with just the guys, and the girls would never go out with just the girls. It was always just together as one group, you know. And even that idea of just wanting to be separate from each other, it's you know, there's nothing wrong with it, really, I suppose.
Well, I suppose it goes naturally with the way childhood and parenthood should be. Is that initially you get your ideas around women and men from your mother and your father, and then it kind of goes on, and then you get it from your peers.
Yes, absolutely.
Really.
Yeah, that's how it works. Yeah.
You know, so it's like, you know, you've come into, let's say, junior infants, and you've had this idea of men and women in the most simplest of forms, you know, before you can, and then you get into school where there's girls and boys, and then that helps you put those building blocks together.
And look at when that happens, like generally the sexes are separated in secondary school. So it's like, okay, you reach puberty and then it makes it a thing. Oh, it's a thing now that like, that, you know, you're a guy and she's a girl. We have to separate
It's forbidden or something.
Yeah, it's forbidden. And it creates like an issue around it that really just shouldn't be there at all. And if you're someone, like if you're a girl and you only have sisters and no brothers, or if you're a boy and you don't have any sisters, where are you getting any, and you go to a single sex school, where are you getting any exposure to the opposite sex?
Yeah.
At all. I mean,
it's strange.
You're not. And I just think it's absurd that we're still
doing it. Like, it's mad. It's so strange as well, because the teachers echo it sometimes. I remember, like, because there'd be fights and stuff after school, like lads, like, you know, the testosterone is fucking coming out the windows.
Yeah.
And there's fights in school and all this kind of stuff and blah blah. And I was involved in some fights, and loads of other people had fights and all this kind of stuff. And one of the things I fucking remember from the time was there was a fight happened, and the two lads were absolutely crucified because it was outside the girls' school.
Oh, really?
And there's you went outside, and the girls were all there watching you fight, and it was like they should be protected from all that kind of crap, you know. And I'm like, thinking back, and I know I'm like, we're just making a big deal out of this, you know, which is, you know, out of the separation of men and women. It's just like, no, we shouldn't, you know. I think that's and like, again, where we come back to our side of things of, you know, something horrible happens and then all men are blamed. It just creates tensions between men and women, I think, you know. And I really feel like, you know, if we were just to actually just openly converse about it with each other, we would actually find out that all of us want the same thing.
Yeah.
We want to live harmoniously.
Of course,
know?
yeah.
And I think that's one of the main things we take. I'm very conscious of time, because I think we're actually coming up on 2 hours now, right?
Oh, really?
Yeah, I think so.
I had something I was thinking about there, though, the last 2 days. I was wondering what you think about it. Like, you know, to me, I think about, okay, where did this again the other day when we had like a family gathering? I don't know what my dad was like. What did he say? He's like, so why do you think, he was just being kind of tongue in cheek and facetious, and he was like, so why do you think men hate women? whereas he was just kind of like just joking a little bit, but you know, we're having a think about it. And I guess, like, for me, what makes sense is like the perspective of what you'd call evolutionary psychology. So evolutionary psychologists kind of look at humans more so, I'd say animals, I suppose, and
I would be
try to
a big exponent of that.
I would as well, exactly.
Yeah.
And the thing is that, like, way back in time, how you achieved power or status was whoever was like the most violent, the best fighter, and whoever could rape as many women so that they could be pregnant, so that they could, you'd have offspring and descendants. So, and if you look at, you know, you know, as animals, we would have been prizing or valuing, you know, who was kind of physically stronger and more aggressive. So on those terms, women are inferior. You know, obviously some women are stronger than some men, but like overall, of course, men are physically stronger than women. So I think if we look back in time, of course, if you were going to look at who's inferior, superior, when the measuring. When the metric is like who's physically stronger, then it makes sense that men were viewed as superior. And I think like just as the centuries have gone by and we're becoming more, you know, enlightened and self-aware and stuff, and we're trying to value people who have, you know, more, you know, disabilities or aren't as able as other people in various different ways, then, you know, not that women are disabled. That's what it sounds like I'm saying. But what I'm saying is that we're moving away from just viewing the value of a person purely in terms of like how physically strong they are, I guess. Yeah. And that's how we're trying to come to the idea that, like, you know, women have many attributes that are just as great as a man's attributes, I suppose. 100%. And I just think that it's hard that it's been thousands, millennia of years that, like, a person's value has been tied up in how physically strong they are. So, like, we're only trying to unravel that mentality in the last you know, kind of like
30, 40 years or whatever.
Yeah, exactly. So,
like you could say that it's been hundreds of years or whatever that, you know, that it's slowly been chipped away at, let's say the inequalities that we find ourselves in. And so like the thing, you know, there's been lots of, like, everything is our imagination. Like everything, the mic I'm talking into right now was imagined by somebody, you know what I mean? And everything. So like all of the societal things that we have together were once based on just like fact. The fact that men were let's say better at hunting, whereas women were better at caring for children, you know, and all of these things. And then we through our imagination, through our collective imagination, have made society, made culture, made all of these things, not removing the animal aspect and more into the human aspect.
Exactly.
You know?
Yeah.
And so like we've even done away with some things that were actually probably maybe like a bit more positive, like polygamy, like, you know, polyamorous relationships where it's like multiple partners was a very common thing in Neolithic times and things like that, where 20,000 years ago women in the village would have slept with many men and men would have slept with many women because they had no idea of reproduction. They thought if 5 men were to have intercourse with this woman, that the child would be born of 5 men. And so then they have 5 fathers and then they have multiple mothers as well within the tribe and all of these things. These things, and now we've developed this idea of sexual promiscuity in women is a bad thing and is something to be looked down upon, which is changing, thankfully, because I always felt that, you know, even when I was less aware of myself and less aware of societal structures, I always thought that women and men should enjoy the same sexual freedoms. And so I do think that we are going in the right direction, but I do feel like that we do need to be more understanding of both sides. And I do think that that's the major thing, is that we just I need to understand from a woman's perspective how things are evolving, and a woman needs to understand from a man's perspective how things are, because if we point the finger at the patriarchy and men and all this kind of stuff, we just create a further divide.
Yeah. Well, yes, absolutely. You know? Yeah, we're just adding, as I said, like we're just adding to hatred, but it's just swapped around now, you know. And it's like as if it's okay for women to hate men, and that's not okay at all.
Yeah, we should love each other.
We should love each other.
You know, that's the thing.
Some of us do.
You know, this is it, and it's like that's I feel love for women, and I feel fucking wonder for women, and the idea of all of the things that I'll never be able to do, like give birth to a child, they're amazing to me. You know, I had toyed with the idea of becoming an obstetrician after I finished doing my law degree. I was like, I'm gonna become a doctor and become an obstetrician, because I just think this is amazing that women are able to do this.
Yeah.
It is amazing, and I like, my mother is incredibly inspirational to me in my life. She came in her 50s, went back to college to try and chase a dream of hers and to do something that she wanted to do. And I have so much respect for my partner Mel and my, you know, and my nieces. You know, I'm glad that they're growing up in a world where they are being fed this narrative that they can do anything that a boy can do. Unbelievable. But if we're to foster that more, if we want more development, we need to work together.
Yes.
I can't see a woman as my opposition, and a woman can't see me as her opposition. Yeah. In my estimation.
Yeah. You know? I had sorry, are we out of time?
No, you're grand. Keep going.
Just something there that I thought was interesting.
It's more for you than anything. So you keep going.
Yeah, you know, I do jiu-jitsu, and I was saying like about 90% of my training partners are men. And the other day I was rolling with a guy who I don't roll with often. He's a blue belt, and he's bigger and stronger than me. But anyway, I was trying my best against him, and he was laughing throughout the round, you know. And then I said to him, I was like, why are you laughing? And then he said, oh, because you're really trying. Like he just thought that this was like funny that like a woman was trying to like attack him, but like unable really to do anything to him. But I thought in that situation, you know, I could have looked at that 2 ways. I could have looked at it in a way like, oh, what a fucking misogynistic asshole. Or else I could have thought, well, look, maybe this is just like an opportunity for him to see that, like, okay, she should be respected because she's trying her best, you know, and she can do the moves as well. Fair enough, she can't complete many of the moves because I'm much bigger and stronger than her, but like she should be respected for being able to try to do the jiu-jitsu. So I think, which is what I said to him. So I just said to him, like, I'm just trying, you know, why is that funny? And I could see that he was like, oh, and then for the rest of the round, then like he made an effort back, because for the first half of the round he was just laughing and just wouldn't try to fight me back. Yeah, because he just thought like this was like kind of a pitiful thing that I was even trying against him, you know. So I felt like that was like, I
can feel any woman that's listening to this now going, that bastard.
Yeah.
Oh God.
But that was it. I could have gone down that road. I could have gone down the road of like, as I say, that asshole, like looking down at me as like this pitiful girl. But I could see when I said to him, when I just said that statement, I said, well, like, I'm just trying. Why is that funny? And I could see on his face, then he was like, oh, and he got it then. And then he tried back with me, and we just had like a normal sparring round then, do you know? So
it's mad.
Like, you have to realize that some people, I think that person as well is from, I hope I'm not offending anyone or being racist. I think that person is from like a country which has more like traditional ideas of men and women, in different roles and stuff like that. So like, people are just learning as well. It's not that he was an asshole. It just wasn't.
It's probably his first experience of it.
Yeah, and it just exactly, and it just wasn't in his mind. And it was like, oh right, okay, that's, you know, yes, we're actually here doing the same thing. We're just trying to get better at jiu-jitsu and enjoying it. And I don't have to. It's not actually funny that she can't do the moves on me. You know that.
Yes,
you know. So I felt like that was a moment where there is just like of insight, perhaps for him. And I didn't come away from that being like angry at him either. I recognized that was just like a point where I could show him something, I suppose, and open his mind a bit more to understanding. Yeah.
It's the running theme of the podcast, really, is that if we do seek understanding of other people, we will in turn get a better understanding of ourselves, and vice versa. You know, if we seek better understanding of where we're coming from, we'll have a better understanding of where others are coming from. You know what I mean? And I think that's very valuable. Such a great like note to end it on as well. Because I do feel that, like, you know, if we do think about our lives in I'm going to remove judgment, and you're not going to be able to do it all the time. You're not. I'm not able to do it all the time. And there's certain times when you were speaking on the other podcast about pedophiles and all these things, and I couldn't understand it. I judged it, and I just stayed in the judgment, and I couldn't, and I parked it, and I just said, right, okay, look, I'm not going to know or understand right now, but I'll give myself the time. And that's what I'd say to anybody that's listening to the podcast. If there's ideas that have been raised in this podcast that you don't understand, and you find yourself judging or saying like, that's bullshit or all this kind of stuff, absolutely, that's your opinion. And I really hope that you have an opinion on the podcast, because it means that it's done something. But if we can just seek to have less judgment and more understanding of ourselves and of other people. Ríoghnach, if there was anybody that was listening that wanted to follow you along, or if there was anybody who was interested in using your services, with your job, how would they get in contact with you? Or is there any way that, you know, somebody could, you know, find out more?
That's a good question. I work in the shadows or under the floorboards. I don't have a website or anything.
Okay, right. She's completely off the grid.
I'm off the grid. Yeah. Just word of mouth. God, they could email me if you want to put my email address when you release the podcast or something.
Yeah.
Or should I don't
know. Your Instagram handle is Angel of Love.
Yeah, you can get me that way as well.
Superhero Angel of Love. Especially if there's any women in here who are like, not just necessarily jiu-jitsu, but they're thinking about trying something new in the sporting sphere, or they're trying something new in anything, or whatever the case may be. I got inspired by your story that you said with Lydia. Definitely check out that podcast episode as well on the First Exchange with Lydia and with Ríoghnach. I just think that like it's just an amazingly powerful story that I'm going to tell my nieces as well about you, and starting at 27 into this new kind of sphere as well. It's just, it's amazing. I find it really, really, I find it inspirational, and I do find that it's just incredibly the way that you viewed the way that you view yourself in that sphere is fantastic. So thank you so much for coming on.
Thanks a million, Colin.
No worries at all.
Thank you. I loved it.
We'll end on that note, a very positive note, and just keep doing what you're doing.
Thank you.
I think it's amazing. No worries.
Thanks.
Peace and love.
Peace and love.